Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, stepped out of his black car and looked up at his old high school. It had been almost 40 years since he was a student there. The school still looked the same, the red brick walls, the tall windows, and the feeling that anything was possible. As he stood there, old memories came rushing back. Some were happy, but some were sad. "We are late, Mr. President," said his assistant, Talia. She looked at her watch with a worried face. "The Minister of Education is waiting for you at the presidential house." "We won't take long," Nayib said. "I just want to see the school before we start the new program." Talia nodded and stepped away to make a phone call. Nayib walked toward the school entrance. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He didn't want cameras or a big welcome. He just wanted to walk through the place where his dreams had started. The doors were open. The school day was over, but the lights were still on. Nayib stepped inside and stood in the hallway. First he smelled something familiar: floor wax, chalk dust, and that school smell that never changed. For a moment he felt like he was 16 again, carrying too many books, trying to stay away from the boys who used to push him against the lockers. His footsteps echoed as he walked. There was his old math classroom. Down the hall was the library, his hiding place when the bullies got too mean. He ran his fingers along the wall, feeling the bumps in the paint. He walked toward the science wing, his favorite place when he was a student. That was where he first dreamed of making big changes in his country. Then he heard a sound. It was the soft squeak of a mop sliding across the floor. An old man was cleaning up a spilled soda. He moved slowly, his back bent. He looked very old, and Nayib felt like he knew him from somewhere. Nayib stopped to watch. The man was wearing the same gray-green uniform that janitors wore when Nayib was a student. He finished mopping and straightened up with great effort. He had to be at least 80 years old. The old man turned, and suddenly Nayib knew who he was. "Mr. Ricardo?" he said in surprise. The old man squinted, then his eyes widened. "Well," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Young Bukele, is that really you?" Nayib stepped closer, amazed. "It's me, Mr. Ricardo. But I'm not so young anymore." Mr. Ricardo leaned on his mop and smiled. "Maybe not young," he said, "but your eyes are the same. Always looking ahead, seeing things others don't." Nayib couldn't believe it. Salvador Ricardo had been the school janitor when he was a student. Even back then he had seemed old. But now, after all these years, he is still here. "You're still working?" Nayib asked. Mr. Ricardo nodded. "Where else would I go? This school is my home." He waved his hand toward the empty hallway. "I've been here for 52 years. I've seen so many students grow up." Nayib did the math. 52 years. That meant Mr. Ricardo had been working here even before Nayib was born. "I've seen what you've done," Mr. Ricardo said. "You've helped the country, security, technology, new projects. I tell the students I knew you when you were their age. Some don't believe me." Nayib felt a lump in his throat. This man had been kind to him when he was a lonely, bullied teenager. He remembered how Ricardo always showed up when the bullies were near. He would find a reason to clean near the library when Nayib was hiding there. "You should be retired," Nayib said. "Resting. Enjoying life." Mr. Ricardo shrugged. "This is my joy," he said. "The kids keep me going. They keep me young, at least in here." He tapped his chest. "Even if my body doesn't feel young anymore." A school bell rang in the distance. "That's for extracurricular activities," Mr. Ricardo said. "I need to finish mopping the science wing before the robotics club arrives." He started to walk away but stopped. "It's good to see you, young Bukele. You did something great with your life." Nayib felt a deep sadness. This man had spent his whole life taking care of the school. What kind of retirement could he have on a janitor's small salary? "Mr. Ricardo," Nayib called. "Do you have time for coffee? I'd love to catch up." The old man looked surprised, then smiled. "For you? Of course. Just let me finish this hallway, 20 minutes. "I'll wait," Nayib said. He pulled out his phone and texted Talia. "Reschedule the presidential house meeting. Something important came up." Talia texted back. "The minister won't like this. We'll make it up to him later. This can't wait." Nayib put his phone away and watched Mr. Ricardo mop. The old man hummed a tune while working. But Nayib's mind was racing. One of the most powerful men in the world had just found out that someone who had been kind to him as a child was still working at 80 years old. He had to do something. But first he wanted to listen. He wanted to understand why Mr. Ricardo was still working after all these years. And he wanted to thank him. Nayib leaned against the wall and waited, thinking about his past. And thinking about the man Mr. Ricardo had always been, quiet, hardworking, and kind. A little later they sat down for coffee. Nayib raised an eyebrow. How do you still remember how I take my coffee? Mr. Ricardo smiled and handed him a cup. It had a small crack on the side. I remember the little things about all my kids, he said. You used to stay late working on your projects. Sometimes I'd bring you coffee. Do you remember? Nayib nodded. I remember. You never said anything. You just left it there. I didn't want to interrupt you, Ricardo said, groaning as he sat down. You were always so focused, like you were trying to fix the whole country before dinner. Nayib took a sip. I can't let you keep working, Mr. Ricardo. You should be retired. Ricardo chuckled. I turned 80 last month. Yes, I should retire. My son tells me that every time he calls from Australia. He looked out the window. But I'd miss this place too much. Nayib took another sip. The coffee was good. You were always kind to me, he said. I never thanked you. Ricardo waved his hand. There's nothing to be thankful for. I just did what was right. Not everyone does what's right, Nayib said quietly. They sat in silence, watching students cross the courtyard. I always knew you'd do something special, Ricardo said. You thought differently. I told my wife, that Bukele kid is going to change the world someday. And what did she say? Ricardo's eyes grew sad. She said I was right. He looked at his wedding ring. She's been gone 15 years. I'm sorry, Nayib said. She must have been special. The best, Ricardo said. The best of all. A knock at the door. A young teacher peeked in. Oh, sorry, Mr. Ricardo. I didn't know you had company. It's fine, Miss Perez. Just an old student, Ricardo said, not mentioning who Nayib was. The teacher nodded and left. She's new, doesn't know you, Ricardo chuckled. The older teachers would know instantly. I appreciate your silence, Nayib said. I didn't come here for attention. You never liked attention. Ricardo shifted with a wince. Are you okay? Nayib asked. Just my knees. They don't work like before. Nayib watched him, feeling sad. Can I ask, is the pension good for someone who worked here so long? Ricardo, smile became smaller. It's not a lot. But I don't need a lot. Nayib didn't ask more questions. But his mind was already thinking of ideas. Do you want to eat something with me? Nothing fancy, Ricardo said. The cafeteria is still open and the food isn't too bad. He looked at his watch. I start work in 1 hour. 10 minutes later, they were sitting at a small table in the school cafeteria. There were only a few students there. Some looked at them, but no one came close. 52 years, Nayib said, poking his macaroni with a fork. That's a long time. You've seen a lot of things change. Ricardo nodded as he carefully cut his sandwich. I've worked under 6 different principals, seen so many teachers come and go, and watched thousands of kids grow up. But kids don't change. Some are scared, some are brave. They're all trying to understand who they are. Why did you stay here so long? Nayib asked. Ricardo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I found my purpose here. After I left the army, I wanted a calm job. I wanted days that were the same. Being around young people gave me hope. He smiled. And I was good at this job, knowing what mess to clean first, what things could be fixed, and which kids needed help. Nayib nodded softly. That too. Watch your step, Ricardo warned. The room they entered was warm. It smelled like cleaning soap and old books. The space was very small, like a closet, but Ricardo had made it feel like home. Against one wall there was a simple desk. The chair had duct tape on it. A shelf held cleaning schedules, repair books, and some old storybooks. On the wall were 2 framed pictures, one of a woman with kind eyes, this was probably Maria, and another of Ricardo in his army uniform. This is my little kingdom, Ricardo said with a small laugh. Only 20 square meters, but it's mine. He pointed to a small kettle. I can make tea if you want. I'm okay, thanks, Nayib said, looking around. He took in every little thing. You made it cozy. Ricardo nodded. You don't need a big space to be happy. Just enough for your memories and a good book. Then he took an old leather book from the shelf. This is what I wanted to show you. He handed Nayib the heavy book. Nayib took it carefully. The cover was soft from years of use. My memory book, Ricardo explained. Open it. Nayib sat in the chair and opened the book. The pages were yellow. The handwriting was neat. Each page had a date. The words told little stories. Some pages had newspaper clippings or photos. What is this? Nayib asked as he turned the pages. My students, Ricardo said. Not all of them. Just the ones who needed extra help. The ones I tried to care for. Nayib read a few entries. September 15, 1978. A red-haired girl was crying on the east staircase. The other kids bullied her because she stuttered. I told her about my cousin who stuttered and became a famous announcer. She laughed. I left a book about successful people with speech problems on her desk. I saw her reading it at lunch. She smiled at me. March 3, 1982. A boy whose father died last month. He came back to school today. He tried to act brave, but I saw him hiding behind the gym. I pretended to need help moving boxes. I told him about losing my own father. He talked. Then he helped me carry the boxes. When he left, his shoulders looked a little lighter. Nayib kept turning pages. He was amazed. There were so many stories. Ricardo had done this for 52 years. He had written down all these small acts of kindness. You wrote all of this? Nayib asked. Ricardo nodded. I didn't write names. That didn't feel right. Just their stories. Nayib flipped to the late 80s, when he had been a student. His heart beat faster. He found a page from that time. June 12, 1988. A tall, skinny boy loves science projects. Older kids stole his backpack again. I found it in the trash. Cleaned it before giving it back. He works hard on his rocket designs. Stays late programming. His mind is different from the others. Teachers don't understand him. But I think he could change the world if they let him think in peace. Nayib stared at the words. A lump formed in his throat. Ricardo had seen him. Even then, he kept reading. November 8, 1988, computer room. The boy now reads about battery technology. Found him asleep at the keyboard at midnight. Called his mother. Walked him home. We talked the whole way about electric cars. He said gasoline is stupid and the future is batteries. His energy is incredible. January 20th, 1989. Skinny boy bullied again. I started mopping near the library at lunch. The bullies stay away when I'm there. I brought him coffee while he worked on his project. He always says thank you even when he's lost in thought. Nayib closed the book carefully. His heart was full. You did this for all of us, he said quietly. Ricardo shrugged. Nothing special. Just small things. Paying attention. It is special, Nayib insisted. Some of these kids, maybe you were the only one who ever noticed them. The teachers are good, Ricardo said. But they have to focus on grades. They don't always see what I see. Nayib gave the book back. Ricardo held it like it was gold. You could have done other jobs, Nayib said. Made more money. Ricardo ran his hand over the book. I found my purpose here. Watching kids grow. Being the person I needed when I was young. He smiled. And I'm also good at cleaning floors. Nayib laughed. But his mind was working. He thought about his country's plans. The projects. The dreams. And then he thought about Ricardo. A man who had changed so many lives, with a mop, kind words, and a heart that cared. Mr. Ricardo, Nayib said, can you show me more? The parts of the school that are special to you? Ricardo looked surprised. Then he smiled. You have time? I have 4 hours before my next meeting, Nayib said. I want to see the school through your eyes. Ricardo put his book back on the shelf. Then let me show you the Real National Institute of San Salvador, he said with a smile. The parts almost no one notices. As they left the small office, Nayib made a decision. Something had to be done. He didn't know exactly what yet. But when Nayib Bukele decided to fix something, he fixed it. And now Mr. Ricardo was at the top of his list. Later in the car, Nayib thought about everything. To the President Bukele airport? The driver asked. Yes, Nayib said. And I need privacy for some calls. As the car drove away, Nayib looked back at the school. Somewhere inside, Mr. Ricardo was still working. Still cleaning. Still in pain. Nayib's jaw tightened. This wasn't right. He took out his phone. I need some information, he told his assistant. The school's budget. Salaries. Pensions. And everything about Salvador Ricardo. His job, his pay, his retirement. Understood, she said. Anything else? Yes. Find out the cost of knee surgery in El Salvador. The best doctors. The best hospitals. And also, who runs training programs for school workers? Is this part of the education plan? She asked. It's becoming something bigger, Nayib answered. I'll explain later. By the time he got on his plane, his email already had reports. As he read, his anger grew. Mr. Ricardo had given so much. He deserved more. And Nayib Bukele was going to make sure he got it. I want to get a new job, said Nayib Bukele. A special job for someone who knows a lot about real life. Not a teacher, but someone who can help students learn things they don't learn in books. As the big airplane got closer to the city of San Salvador, Nayib had already made 12 phone calls and sent 23 emails. He had a plan in his head, but he still needed to figure out some small details. Later that day, he had a meeting with the Minister of Education. But while they talked, Nayib kept thinking about his old school. He remembered Mr. Ricardo, the kind janitor, and his special notebook filled with memories. That night in his office, Nayib's assistant gave him a piece of paper. It had Mr. Ricardo's home address and phone number on it. Nayib looked at it for a long time, thinking. He knew that just giving money wasn't the answer. Mr. Ricardo was not the kind of man who would take money as a gift. He was too proud for that. Nayib needed a way to help him with honor, to give him a job where he could still help students but without hurting his knees. Nayib picked up his special notebook, the one where he wrote his best ideas. He started writing the next part of his plan. By the time the sun rose in the sky, he knew exactly what to do. He will go back to his old school in 3 weeks. But this time he wouldn't just bring old memories. He would bring a solution. The next 3 weeks were very busy for Nayib. He had a lot of meetings, made many phone calls, and signed important papers. He worked very hard, staying up late every night, making sure every detail was just right. Finally the day came. Nayib was going back to his school. He felt excited but also a little nervous. This time he didn't go alone. His wife, Isabella, came with him. A lawyer and 2 people from the education team also joined. Nayib had asked the school principal to be ready for a meeting, but he had not yet told him why. As their car stopped in front of the school, Nayib spoke to his team. "Remember," he said, "we do nothing until I talk to Mr. Ricardo. This is for him first." Inside the school, students were finishing their day. Some of them saw Nayib and started whispering and pointing excitedly. He smiled at them but kept walking. He was looking for Mr. Ricardo. They found him in the gym, cleaning up after a volleyball game. From far away, Nayib saw how slowly Mr. Ricardo moved. He bent down to pick up trash, but it looked like it hurt him. "Mr. Ricardo," Nayib called out. His voice echoed in the big gym. The old janitor turned around, looking surprised. Then his face brightened. "You came back," Mr. Ricardo said, leaning on his broom. "I didn't think you would." "I told you I would," Nayib said, smiling. He introduced his team. "They will talk to the principal while you and I have a little chat. Is that okay?" Mr. Ricardo looked curious. "What do you want to talk about?" "Well," Nayib said, "I want you to show me the school. Show me the places that need the most help. The parts of the school that people usually forget." Mr. Ricardo raised an eyebrow. "You want a tour of the school's problems?" "Exactly," Nayib said with a grin. "No one knows them better than you." A little later, in the principal's office, Nayib spoke to Director Javier. "Thank you for meeting with us," he said. "What I am about to say will need your help." The principal nodded. "It is an honor to have you here, President Bukele. My interest in this school came back because of something special that happened 3 weeks ago," Nayib said, looking at Mr. Ricardo. "I found out that my old janitor was still here, even though he is 80 years old. But the most surprising thing was learning how much he has done for this school for over 50 years. Nayib turned to Mr. Ricardo, surprised. "I had no idea you kept records of everything." "Only for myself," Mr. Ricardo said quietly. "To remember." Nayib took a folder from Isabella's hands and opened it. "That's why I'm creating the Ricardo Foundation, with an initial donation of $50 million. The room went completely silent. Mr. Ricardo's mouth fell open in shock. "This foundation will have many jobs," Nayib explained, getting more excited. "First, it will help the people who work in schools but are often forgotten. The janitors, the cooks, the bus drivers, and all the other staff who make schools run smoothly. These heroes deserve better pay and more respect." He gave a paper to the principal. "The foundation's first job will be to fix this school. Every problem that Mr. Ricardo showed me today will be taken care of." The principal looked at the document. His eyes widened. "This is very generous, President Bukele." "And there's more," Nayib said, looking at Mr. Ricardo. "The foundation will also create a new job. A special job in this school and later in schools all across El Salvador. The job will be called Comprehensive Maintenance Supervisor." Mr. Ricardo listened carefully, looking confused but also a little hopeful. "This new supervisor will not just take care of the school," Nayib explained. "He will also teach students important life skills, how to use tools, how to fix things, how to solve real-world problems." Then Nayib smiled. "And I want you, Mr. Ricardo, to be the very first one to have this job." "Me?" Mr. Ricardo whispered. "But my knees. I can barely." The job comes with full medical benefits, Nayib said gently. That includes surgery to fix your knees. Also, the salary will be 3 times what you earn now as a janitor. Mr. Ricardo's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Just say you'll think about it, Nayib said. You can do as much or as little as you want. You can focus on teaching students. And when you retire, your pension will be based on your new salary, not your janitor's wage. The principal looked over the papers again. This is an amazing opportunity, Mr. Ricardo. Mr. Ricardo wiped his eyes. Why would you do this for me, President Bukele? Nayib smiled. Because 52 years ago, you cleaned the school every day and paid attention to people that others ignored, he said. You saw me when I needed someone to see me. Now, I'm just returning the favor. Isabella handed another document to Mr. Ricardo. There's one more thing. The foundation will pay for your son and grandkids to visit from Australia next month. And whenever you want to visit them, there will always be a ticket waiting for you. Mr. Ricardo covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook as he cried. After a while, he looked up, his eyes red but determined. I accept your offer, President Bukele, he said. But with one condition. What condition? Nayib asked. That I can still clean this hallway, Mr. Ricardo said with a small smile. I've been cleaning this floor for 52 years. I wouldn't feel right stopping completely. Nayib laughed. Deal. But only after we fix your knees. The principal shook Mr. Ricardo's hand. Congratulations, Supervisor Ricardo. As they shook hands, Nayib looked at Mr. Ricardo's face. He saw surprise, gratitude, and the same quiet dignity that had always been there. Later, as they were leaving, Mr. Ricardo turned to Nayib. There's something I want to show you, he said. He led Nayib to a small office. Inside, he opened an old drawer and pulled out a package. You threw this away years ago, Mr. Ricardo said. But I kept it. Nayib unwrapped it and saw old papers filled with his teenage handwriting. It was a design for electric car batteries, something he had worked on as a kid. Why did you keep this? Nayib asked, amazed. Because sometimes we don't see the value in what we create, Mr. Ricardo said. Nayib smiled. You've protected many things, haven't you? Not just papers but people too. Mr. Ricardo nodded and Nayib felt grateful. Maybe now you'll believe me when I say I always knew you'd do great things, Mr. Ricardo said with a wink. As they walked down the school hallway, Nayib felt like life had come full circle. A young boy with big dreams had grown up. Now he was a man who could help others with their dreams too. The quiet janitor who once helped Nayib was now being helped by him. When did they start calling you an integral maintenance manager? Nayib asked with a smile. I still don't believe it, Mr. Ricardo said, shaking his head. I feel like I'll wake up and realize it was just a dream. It's real, Nayib said. Your knees will be fixed, your grandchildren will visit you, and students will learn from you. Mr. Ricardo stopped walking. His eyes filled with happy tears. Do you know what makes me the happiest? That someone noticed my hard work. That it mattered. It mattered, Nayib said firmly. More than you can imagine. 2 months passed. During that time, Mr. Ricardo had surgery on both knees. The doctors fixed them, and for the first time in years he could walk without pain. At the school, everyone was talking. Students whispered about big changes happening. People said the president was coming. Others asked why the old janitor had disappeared. But nobody knew the full story yet. Then, on a bright and sunny morning, all the students and teachers gathered in the big school auditorium. They sat in their seats, chatting excitedly. Up on the stage, there were chairs for special guests. Outside, news reporters and cameras waited. The school principal, Mr. Javier, stepped up to the microphone. He smiled and said, Today is a very special day for our school. We are welcoming back one of our students from the past. But he is not just any student. He is now the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele. Everyone clapped loudly. Nayib walked onto the stage. He was wearing a simple black suit. His face was serious, but his eyes were kind. He shook hands with the principal and then stepped up to the microphone. Good morning, he said. Many of you know me as the president of El Salvador. Some of you know that I used to be a student here. But today I am not here to talk about myself. I am here to talk about someone more important than me. Nayib turned to one side of the stage. Mr. Ricardo was standing there. I want to introduce you to Mr. Ricardo Mendez, Nayib said. Mr. Ricardo walked onto the stage. He no longer walked slowly or in pain. He stood tall, wearing a nice gray suit instead of his old janitor clothes. Some students recognized him. Others did not. For 52 years, Nayib said, Mr. Ricardo has been the heart of this school. He cleaned, fixed things and kept everything running. But he did much more than that. He helped students who were bullied. He gave advice to kids who were sad. He fixed broken things, but sometimes he also helped fix people. Mr. Ricardo looked down, feeling shy as Nayib spoke. Today, Nayib continued, I am proud to announce the creation of the Ricardo Foundation with $50 million. The entire room gasped. Camera flashes went off. The foundation will help the true heroes of schools, Nayib explained. The janitors, the cooks, and all the workers who help schools run. They work hard, but they don't always get the respect or money they deserve. The students listened carefully. Here at this school, Nayib said, we will start by fixing up the science building. It will have a new name, the Ricardo Innovation Center. More applause. Mr. Ricardo's eyes widened. He did not know about this part of the plan. And leading this new center, Nayib said, will be Mr. Ricardo. He will teach students everything he has learned over the years. The applause was so loud that the room shook. Mr. Ricardo stepped up to the microphone. His voice was soft but strong. I have spent my whole life in the background just doing my job. This school has been my home for 52 years. The students have been like my family. He looked at the crowd. I have seen thousands of kids grow up here. I have watched them struggle and succeed. And if I have learned one thing, it is this. Every person matters. Every person deserves to be seen. Everyone was quiet. Even the students who usually whispered were listening. Thank you, President Bukele, Mr. Ricardo said, his voice full of emotion. And thank you all for letting me be part of your lives. The applause lasted 5 whole minutes. After the event, Mr. Ricardo turned to Nayib. Why did you name it after me? You could have called it anything else. Because names matter, Nayib said. And yours deserves to be remembered. Mr. Ricardo smiled. I remember a boy from 15 years ago, he said. He was always angry. One day, I found him behind the gym with a bottle of pills. The room got quiet. I sat with him for 2 hours, Mr. Ricardo said. I talked to him. I called the school counselor. That boy is now a doctor. Every Christmas he sends me a card. A reporter raised her hand. President Bukele, what will the Ricardo Foundation do first? First, Nayib said, we will study how janitors, cooks, and school workers help students. We will find ways to support them better. Second, we will make sure they get more money, training, and respect. He showed a graph on his tablet. Right now, school janitors in El Salvador don't earn enough to live well. Many work 2 jobs. After years of work, they retire with almost nothing. That is unfair. The Ricardo Foundation will help change this. Another reporter asked, and the new building? The Ricardo Innovation Center will be a special place, Nayib said. Students will learn how to build things, fix things, and solve problems. Mr. Ricardo smiled and stepped up to the microphone. If I may say something, he said, students today know a lot of facts. But many don't know how to fix a broken chair or use a screwdriver. This center will help change that. Suddenly, a student raised his hand. Mr. Ricardo, will you teach us how to build rockets? The old janitor laughed. I will teach you how to use tools and solve problems. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. The school started building the Ricardo Innovation Center right away. Engineers and architects worked hard. They even asked Mr. Ricardo for advice. At the same time, Mr. Ricardo started his new job as the head of maintenance. He taught small groups of students in the school's workshop. Word spread fast. Everyone wanted to learn from the janitor who could fix anything. One October afternoon, the new center was finally ready. The science building looked completely different. It had big windows with lots of sunlight. It had modern labs and workshops full of tools. What do you think? Nayib asked Mr. Ricardo. Mr. Ricardo touched a work table he helped design. It's more than I ever imagined, he said. Thank you. That day they had a big ceremony. The students, teachers, and news reporters came. They cut a red ribbon. Students showed off their projects. One girl showed a robot that sorted trash. Another boy showed a solar-powered car he built. Mr. Ricardo taught us how to use tools, he said proudly. Nayib smiled. That was exactly what he wanted. As the students talked excitedly, Mr. Ricardo stood proudly beside them. He had spent 52 years cleaning the school. But now he was teaching the next generation how to build the future. And he finally knew his work had always mattered. When the big event was over, Nayib walked back to the microphone. The room became quiet again. Today I have one last thing to say, Nayib said with a smile. Even Mr. Ricardo doesn't know about this yet. Mr. Ricardo, the kind old janitor, looked up in surprise. A few months ago, I visited Mr. Ricardo in his office, Nayib continued. And do you know what he gave me? Something truly amazing. Some very old papers with drawings of batteries. Nayib held up the yellow papers, now placed inside a shiny glass frame. But here's the crazy part, Nayib said, looking at the crowd. I made these drawings when I was a teenager studying here. And later, I threw them away because I thought they weren't good enough. The audience gasped. But Mr. Ricardo didn't throw them away, Nayib said. He saved them for over 40 years. The whole room fell silent. People stared at the old papers inside the glass frame. Back then, I didn't know how important these designs were, Nayib continued. But when my team of engineers looked at them, they saw something special. Even though I was just a kid when I made these, the ideas in them helped us create something new. Everyone leaned forward, listening closely. Because of these old drawings, we made a big improvement in battery technology, Nayib explained. We even got a patent, which is like an official certificate saying that the idea belongs to us. The crowd murmured in amazement. And because I was the one who originally drew these designs, I could have kept all the credit for myself. But I won't do that, Nayib said firmly. Because if Mr. Ricardo hadn't saved my work, none of this would have happened. People nodded in agreement. So, I have decided something important, Nayib announced. Mr. Ricardo will receive 0.5% of all the money made from this new battery technology. For a moment, no one made a sound. Then gasps filled the room. That might not sound like a big number, Nayib said, but over the next 10 years, it will add up to millions of dollars. The audience erupted in applause. Some people even stood up, cheering loudly. Mr. Ricardo sat still, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at Nayib, not sure if he had heard correctly. Nayib turned to him and said, "You saved my dream when I didn't believe in it myself. You held on to my work until I was ready to use it. It's only fair that you share in this success." Mr. Ricardo blinked. He opened his mouth but couldn't find any words. "I don't know what to say," he finally whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Nayib said warmly, reaching out to shake Mr. Ricardo's hand. Cameras flashed. The crowd cheered. People clapped and smiled. Some even had tears in their eyes. After the ceremony ended, everyone started walking around, chatting and looking at the new building. But Mr. Ricardo pulled Nayib aside to a quiet corner, away from all the noise. "There's something I need to tell you," Mr. Ricardo said in a serious voice. Nayib frowned slightly, confused. "What is it?" Mr. Ricardo looked around to make sure no one else could hear. Then he leaned in close and whispered something into Nayib's ear. No one else heard what he said. Nayib's eyes widened. His face changed. He looked at Mr. Ricardo in shock. "Is that true?" Nayib asked softly. Mr. Ricardo nodded. His face was serious. "I always wanted to tell you," Mr. Ricardo said, "but I never knew when the right time would be. After everything that happened today, I think you deserve to know the truth." Nayib stayed silent. His mind was racing. The words Mr. Ricardo had whispered to him changed everything. It made Nayib see his past in a whole new way. It made him realize that Mr. Ricardo wasn't just a school janitor. He was much more than that. And for more than 40 years he had kept this secret. A secret that would change Nayib's life forever. A secret that was even more valuable than money, than a big building or even a new invention. But for now that secret would stay between them. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.